I think it's going to go by kind of quick, but just hang on. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is contemporary compatibilism. So two theses in the current debate. So I just call it the free will thesis. Human agents have effective free will, right? So the idea is pretty simple. It's like if you want to do something, it's in your will to do something. Humans can actually do that thing, right? It's totally in their control. It's totally in their power to do that. All right, and then determinism. Right, so all events, including human actions, are causally determined for a set of initial conditions. So the idea is like through physics or whatever, we can have a set of initial conditions, and using our best mathematical models, we could reliably predict or accurately predict like everything that will happen, including human actions. All right. So you note that these are not like outright contradictory, right? There's obviously some major tension going on here, but they're not logically contradictory. But one view is going to say that they are contradictory. Actually, incompatible. So metaphysically incompatible. Incompatibilism is a view that you can't hold both the free will thesis and determinism at the same time. Incompatibilism is obviously a view that you can hold them both at the same time. Okay. So two major forms of incompatibilism, right? Libertarianism and hard determinism. I think like most people just say determinism, not hard determinism, but to distinguish it from like just the thesis that all events are causally determined, we can use hard determinism. So libertarianism, I think everybody's familiar with this stuff already, but you have free will, and it's not true. This is important. It's not true that all events are causally determined. You might have most events or something like that. You could have just some. You could have none at all. Everything's kind of random, or something like that. Hard determinism, obviously you don't have free will and everything is causally determined. Okay, then we'll look at a couple of reasons why we might be deterred away from hard determinism. And the main reason is because it seems like if we're hard determinists, we don't have moral responsibility anymore, right? So here's just a little argument. If human actions are causally determined, then humans have no other possibility to do whatever they do. If humans have no other possibility than to do whatever they do, then they do not have moral responsibility for that action. So if determinism is true, if hard determinism is true, then human agents don't seem to have moral responsibility. So, it's not necessary that we have to have moral responsibility, but, there's a classic example of like, if you're a hard determinist and someone just comes up to you and like slaps you in the face, like you don't have any right to exercise retribution against that person, right? It's fully determined. It wasn't in their control at all. They bear no responsibility. There's no oughts or shoulds or anything like that. So that seems a little bit concerning. So maybe we don't want to hold hard determinism. On the other hand, why might we not want to hold libertarianism? Seems like we're being kind of anti-science, right? Science overwhelmingly confirms determinism, like mainly through physics and things like this. Our mathematical models that we get through physics are really, really good. They can really accurately and reliably predict what's going to happen. And so it seems like from a set of initial conditions, so science really confirms determinism. If we go so far as to just deny determinism, then we kind of deny science. And so we don't want to be cherry picking science, right? We don't want to say like, oh, because our philosophical commitments are such and such, we can't commit to this particular thing, but we'll commit to everything else science has to offer, right? So it's a little bit weird. So the state of incompatibilism right now, if we're libertarian, we seem to be anti-science, and if we're hard determinists, we seem to have no moral responsibility. And for a long time, like nobody thought compatibilism is true, right? I mean, first of all, like how do you make this work? Second of all, it seems like if you're compatibilist, are you both anti-science and have no moral responsibility? I don't know. That seems pretty terrible. So we want to come up with something else. And here's gonna be the way we do this. So we want to maintain determinism and the free will thesis, and we don't want to slip into this anti-science, no moral responsibility kind of thing. So what we're going to do first is identify this principle, called the principle of alternate possibilities, PAP for short, as so affectionately named. An agent is morally responsible for an action only if they could have done otherwise. And this is the second premise in the argument against determinism, right? That you don't have moral responsibility. If you didn't have another choice in your actions, then you're not morally responsible for it. So that's the contrapositive of the principle of alternate possibilities. And the key compatibilist move is going to be to deny the principle of alternate possibilities. All right. So why do we want to deny it? So Harry Frankfurt was the main guy who did this, and he had these sorts of cases that are now called Frankfurt-style cases. So Black wants Jones to steal a cookie. Black wants this so much that he put like a neurochip. Like Black is kind of a super scientist. He put a chip in Jones's brain that forces him to steal a cookie the instant he decides not to. Jones wants to steal a cookie, and so he steals a cookie. Is Jones morally responsible for stealing a cookie? He seems to be morally responsible for stealing a cookie. He wanted to, and he did it. He had effective action, so he did it. Was he free in doing it? Well, no. He had no other choice than to steal a cookie, because Black would have changed his brain state such that he would have stolen a cookie if he decided not to. So the claim here, Jones couldn't have done otherwise, but he's still morally responsible because, well, it seems like, he wants to, and so we would all hold him morally responsible, even though he had no other choice. So here's sort of what contemporary compatibilism looks like, right? So compatibilism is good. It doesn't lead to no moral responsibility because we deny the principle of alternate possibilities. Even though we don't have any alternate possibility in doing what we're doing, that doesn't mean we don't have any moral responsibility, because having alternate possibilities does not factor into having moral responsibility. Right? And compatibilism is not anti-science because we're still holding on to determinism, right? So compatibilists still think that every action we do is causally determined, right? But we also have to reject the principle of alternate possibilities. I don't know of any contemporary compatibilists who hold the principle of alternate possibilities. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know how they would do it. This is like far and away the most common way to hold compatibilism. So compatibilists are now in the position of we don't have a good way of judging when we have moral responsibility, right? The libertarians have the nice principle of alternate possibilities. Determinists don't have to worry about moral responsibility at all. But now we somehow got to figure out how to make do without the principle of alternate possibilities. So metaphysics of compatibilist moral responsibility. This is the main idea is this sort of that we're going to work with, at least, which is put forward by Frankfurt, and still a very popular view, is sort of a higher order volitional view. So the idea is you have sort of different orders of desires and wants. At the base order, first order, you have first order volitions, and it's a want to do an action, right? So if I want to pick up this coffee mug, I had a first order desire to pick up this coffee mug, right? But I can also have second order volitions or desires. These are like desires to desire to do something, right? And you can also have third order and so on and so forth. So the idea is to focus on free will and moral responsibility residing in these higher order volitions. These want to make your will something, right? So a typical way of sort of like cashing out free will for compatibilists is in this like sort of tiered structure, right? So you have free will, you have to actually want to do something, first of all, but your second order desire also has to be aligned to that. So you have to want to do that, basically. And you have to do the action because you want to do it. If you were coerced to do it or something like that, that doesn't count as free will. And then this last condition. So even if you knew for certain that you had no possible way to do the action, you would still want to do it, right? And so compatibilists are gonna sort of narrow in on this second requirement and say this is where where moral responsibility kind of resides. It's in this second order desire to want to do something. So the way compatibilists are going to have moral responsibility then is say someone has moral responsibility for their action only if they want to do something, right? So if you didn't want to do something, then you don't have moral responsibility for the action, right? Yeah, couple questions. All right, first one, so we don't have any sufficient conditions for moral responsibility yet. So we can tell when someone's not morally responsible for something. If their second order volitions weren't aligned with what they did, they're not morally responsible for that action. But we don't have sufficient conditions yet. This isn't necessarily problematic, but at some point we probably want to work in sufficient conditions. later on. And then the second question, sort of looking forward, insane people, like, they don't seem to know any better, right? They don't seem to really have a good grasp on their character. These people maybe don't have a good control over their second order volitions. Are they morally responsible for their actions? If they don't have control over their second order volitions, how can you be morally responsible for your actions, right? So a couple of questions to keep in the back of your mind as we move forward. But that's basically like a crash course in contemporary compatibilism, right? So deny principal alternate possibilities, sort of situate the metaphysics of moral responsibility in your second order volitions, sort of like your second order volitions, sort of adhering to what your first order volitions and desires are, and that's what compatibilism is going to look like. Okay. So moving forward, we're interested in how compatibilism is going to work with some theology that we're going to do. So we're going to first explore a couple of theological commitments. So we're going to go all the way back to Augustine for these commitments, and they're intended to be like fairly broad. That yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, on the compatibilism, like free will. What about, this is just an example that came to mind. So like an alcoholic wants to drink alcohol. They don't want to keep being an alcoholic. They still do drink, though. Would you say that that their higher order desire isn't really to not be an alcoholic,
right?
Because they give in.
Yeah. So that's a discussion Frankfurt has. He calls it the unwilling addict. So the idea is that you're being coerced, like, physiologically or psychologically or whatever, to do certain actions, even though your second order volitions don't want to do it. So in this case, you wouldn't have free will, right? You wouldn't have free will, but you wouldn't be morally responsible for these actions either, because your second order volitions aren't in line with what you're doing. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Does Catholic have, Patrick, mortal sin and addiction?
Yeah, that's actually lines up with Catholic theology of, like,
oh, really?
If you're, like, they don't spell it out in exact terms, but, like, if you're addicted to something and you, like, keep committing the same sin, like, obviously there's a lessening of culpability there that that the Catechism spells out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think for Frankfurt, you don't have moral responsibility at that point, because your second order volitions aren't in line with what you're doing. You don't have moral responsibility. Frankfurt also goes so far as to say that, like, in some cases of addiction, like, you might not even be a person. He calls them wontons. Whatever. That's a discussion for another day.
I need to read some of this guy.
He's interesting. He really, he was the guy on the first slide. It was a picture of Frankfurt. Anyways. Okay, so some theological commitments. We're going back to Augustine. The intention is for these commitments to be basically for all of Christendom is going to accept these things. Okay, so an excerpt from his a letter. Without the grace of God, the human will in no way can escape from the flesh, nor should the will be said to be free so long as it is subject to desires that conquer and blind it, for a person is a slave to him by whom he has been defeated. And then from a letter to Simplicianus, from Adam has come a single mass of sinners and wicked persons. It is far from God's grace, and both Jews and Gentiles belong to the one lump of it. All right, so I'm going to draw two conclusions out of these, and I think like, all right, these are just two passages. We can look at the rest of Augustine's corpus if we want to, but I think these are fair to draw, fair to commit ourselves to. One, I'm going to call it depravity. Humans by ourselves, like, without divine grace, can only do sinful actions. And there's a famous Latin phrase, non posse non peccare, attached with this doctrine. And another one, which I call responsibility. The humans alone are morally responsible for our sins. Namely, that God or, like, animals or whatever aren't responsible for our sins. If I sin, like, that's on me. It's totally on me. It's not on the devil. It's not on whatever. It's on me. All right, and so we're going to run into a problem that very much looks like the sort of compatibilism, incompatibilism problem. So humans are morally responsible for an action only if they are free to do that action, but humans aren't free to not sin. So then humans don't seem to be morally responsible for their sin, which goes against responsibility. So at the very least, we end up in a very similar state as the free will thesis and determinism, where it's like, all right, not flatly logically contradictory, but there's a lot of tension in the metaphysical realm going on right now. We want some way to alleviate this tension a little bit, and I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah, one question maybe that's foreshadowing a much longer discussion later on is premise one just the principle of alternate possibilities? Can we get away with just straight contemporary compatibilism here, just deny principle of alternate possibilities, accept everything Frankfurt accepts and whatever? I don't know, maybe. We'll see. Okay, next part. So now we're going to look at some medieval and Reformation views on like sort of how they handled this tension. Okay, but first we're gonna talk about language for a second. Okay, so there's two words that get thrown around in Latin a lot. The voluntas, which like if you look it up in the dictionary, means like desire or will or something like that, and the arbitrium, which means judgment and can also mean will. And a lot of the times they're translated the same. I have two examples right here. So Luther's on the bond of the will is de servo arbitrio, arbitrio being like a form of arbitrium, and then from Aquinas, right, on the will of God, de voluntate Dei. So often they are the same, like semantically the same. But not always, right? Here's an example from Augustine. The free choice of the will includes both arbitrio and voluntas. So in this case, arbitrio being meaning something like judgment. And are they metaphysically the same? All right, this is really tough to say. And just looking at the words, like we're not going to answer this question. I say no. I think it'll become clear as we look at some texts. But just for the time being, to avoid committing ourselves to any sort of metaphysical statements about voluntas and arbitrium being the same things, I'm just going to leave them untranslated for now. All right, game plan. Moving forward, we're going to try to answer two questions, and we're going to start off with just the medievals and look at the reformers, just try to get a good like grasp of what's going on, sort of like in the, between like 1000 AD and 1500 or something. So what are the metaphysics of the will, human decision-making, and human actions, and what are the conditions for moral responsibility? All right, so hopefully at the end of this section, we'll be able to answer those questions. All right, we're going to get started off with the big dog himself, Thomas Aquinas. All right, so Thomas Aquinas says a couple things that are a little bit difficult to reconcile together. The first is an excerpt from the Summa Theologica. I think the most important line is probably the first one, right? The root of liberty is voluntas as the subject thereof, but is the intellect as its cause. And then what is this? The last line, right? Hence philosophers define free arbitrium as being a free judgment arising from reason, implying that the intellect is the root of liberty. So I think in this first excerpt we can see like I don't know. I think it's clear from here that Aquinas doesn't think voluntas and arbitrium are the same thing. Like metaphysically, they don't seem to mean the same thing either in this case. In the later work, De Veritate, he seems to say something just a tad different about what free arbitrium is. So here, like sort of at the bottom, free arbitrium is therefore the voluntas. The term does not designate the voluntas absolutely, however, but with reference to one of its actions to choose. So I think the idea that Thomas is getting at here is that arbitrium is very much related to the will, but just like one specific action. So if we take voluntas as meaning something like desire, so if the general action of the voluntas is the desire, to will, to want things or whatever, it can also, for Aquinas, choose. It can also choose things, and that's in particular arbitrium. So we're going to classify this as intellectualism. We classify it as intellectualism because of this idea that freedom is rooted in the intellect. And that's just really going to characterize Aquinas' view. But also another thing, the soul kind of has two faculties, right? Everything we're talking about, like from this point on, has to do with a rational soul. So the sort of decision-making organ, the effective acting organ for all actions for humans is the rational soul. And Thomas thinks there's two faculties in here, right? The voluntas and the intellect, and together they allow humans to do things and make decisions and act. Arbitrium is the act of choosing, and free arbitrium, insofar as it is free desire, is just the voluntas, right? So we really want to get this picture clear, that we have two faculties, they work together to make decisions, right? I think we should at this point already separate separate our sort of common notions of reason and intellect from like the way we normally say these words that throws them around, and really push them into the soul. Not like a thought is not something that just the intellect does. It's something with the intellect and the voluntas. It's an internal mental action, and so the whole soul has to come together for this, right? Okay, but this is Thomas Aquinas' intellectualism. All right, Bernard of Clairvaux. So the most important part is going to be these last few lines, right? Free arbitrium, the word free having reference to the voluntas, and the word arbitrium to the intellect. So already this is a little bit different from Thomas Aquinas' view. Bernard thinks freedom sort of lives in the voluntas and not the intellect, but rather the sort of action of choosing, the judgment, whatever exactly the arbitrium does is more related to the intellect, but the freedom we get from the voluntas. Right. So we're going to classify this view as voluntarism because of where the freedom comes from. And you should know, so voluntarism typically gets used when you talk about Occam, and Occam was a radical voluntarist, and this like really affected a lot of the reformers and later philosophers. This is not Occam's voluntarism. It's probably more accurate to call Bernard a moderate or something like that, but Occam is really hard to read, and he's not super clear in the text that I selected, so I didn't put him up here. But Occam basically thinks the intellect is like a very tiny role, and that everything has to do with desire and will and wanting and things like that. So that's Occam's voluntarism, and that's not exactly what Bernard holds. He is more voluntarist than he is intellectualist. But yeah, so two views, voluntarism, intellectualism, sort of they differ in where exactly we get freedom from, but the basic idea is the same. In the rational soul, we have the voluntas and we have the intellect. They come together for human decision making and acting together. Somehow, however they work, we can do actions by their working together. We'll look at one more text, Albert the Great. This one's really important, I think. Albert is very much a moderate, and he lays out this nice sort of four-step recipe for how humans do something, right? Four things follow one another in the work of the rational soul. The first of these things is the action of reason, which by considering puts forth the appetites of the soul and discerns what the appetite is. Second is the action of the voluntas, consenting to one appetite. Third is that which chooses what is loved by the voluntas, and this we call free arbitrium. And fourth is the perfected voluntas. Okay, a better word would be like completed or something like that, not perfected. Fourth is the completed voluntas, which moves to the pursuit of the appetite, discerned by reason and desired by the voluntas and chosen by the free arbitrium. So we're going to summarize Albert's view in this four-step process, right? So first, intellect does something. It considers, it sort of presents a bunch of possible actions to the rational soul. Next, the voluntas is going to take a look at all these possible actions and the sort of moral judgments the intellect has to offer, and it's going to sort of desire one and pick one out. The free arbitrium is going to choose or consent to one of these desires, and then finally the voluntas is going to carry this out. So we're gonna sort of broadly classify the medieval perspective on human actions. I'm going to call it a moderate dual faculty psychology. And so here's the basic idea, right? Two faculties in the soul, psychology, like soul, like from the Greek psyche or whatever. We want the intellect to just do this one sort of like hard thing, which is just like figure out what the heck is going on, figure out what we can do, and also provide some moral judgments on what the possible actions are. The voluntas is going to be this sort of like free organ that can just sort of desire. It just wants to do things, and it's going to pick something out to do. And then we're going to situate free arbitrium kind of like in between the two. Free arbitrium is going to come out of the intellect and voluntas like sort of working together. And the term I'm going to use is proper communication. It's a little bit vague intentionally, but the idea is that the free arbitrium in particular, you need the voluntas working with the intellect in the right kind of way for your choice and effectuating desire to be free, right? Now, the arbitrium is still there, even if they're not working together. Arbitrium meaning like just choosing and effectuating an action. but for it to be free, you need the intellect and the voluntas to be working together in the right kind of way. Right. So this is the idea that we're going to be moving with forward. I think it's rooted in like just throughout the what the medievals wrote. I also think it's present in Reformation writing. We don't have to spend too much time on this, but like here's a text from Johann Gerhard. I think you can see he almost quotes Bernard verbatim here at the bottom, like free arbitrium, which is the faculty of the mind and the will together, so that arbitrium pertains to the mind and free to the voluntas. This exact same idea that we see in Bernard, with where he says, the word free relating to the voluntas and the word arbitrium relating to the intellect. So I think Johann Gerhard holds this view. Philip Melanchthon is a little bit flakier on this. He has some really interesting things to say, but his view changes a lot. So I think in this particular text, this is the later Melanchthon. So I think this is 1540s edition of Loci Communes, but he also had a 1520 edition of Loci Communes, which says something a little bit different. It's really interesting and worth talking about more at some other point in time. But basically, Melanchthon thinks that the voluntas has the same sort of status as the tyrant, and I think the best way to understand him is referring to like Plato's Republic, like the tyrant in Plato's Republic. So the voluntas is very much, we think of him as like kind of like a king, and when properly informed by the intellect, he's this like great philosopher king. But that's not what he's saying. Is later Loci Communes. He's a little bit clearer here. But I think it's pretty clear that he holds this view as well. And I also think John Calvin holds this view, or at least something very similar to it. Calvin seems to think there's also a third faculty in the soul, which he calls spirit. But he doesn't talk about that too much. Really what's going on for him is, you have the free arbitrium coming out of the voluntas and the intellect. But yeah, so hopefully it's clear from these texts. I think dual faculty psychology is broadly what the medievals held and what the reformers held, and they're picking up a lot from the medievals. You have this nice strong intellectual tradition, starting with like Aquinas and Bernard and Albert and Occam, and going all the way up through Calvin and Gerhard into the people. Okay. Right. Dual faculty psychology, the view we're going to be working with: intellectual and desiring faculties in the soul, the intellect and the voluntas. Free arbitrium is caused by the proper communication of the intellect and voluntas. Medieval reformers held the dual faculty psychology view of the will. Okay, cool. Before we move on, it is worth taking like one step back to think. So moving forward, I'm going to be trying to draw some connections between contemporary compatibilism and dual faculty psychology. And so there's going to be a little bit of like this. We're going to try to understand what the medievals were saying in a contemporary philosophical light. And so we want to know, when we say will, what word would like the reformers and medievals have used, right? I think the natural choice here is arbitrium. It's not voluntas, but it's arbitrium. Namely, arbitrium can be free. It can also be bound, right? It doesn't seem like that the voluntas can be bound. It seems like the voluntas has to be free. It does what it wants to do, right? It wants to want things, and so somehow it's free. Intellect is not really free. It doesn't seem like it just does things, right? And yeah, Occam has this really strong view that everything that doesn't have an arbitrium is a brute. But anyways, yeah, arbitrium has to do something with effective decision. It seems like voluntas compared to arbitrium, it has a limited role and it has a limited responsibility. So what we're going to do moving forward is that when we say arbitrium, we're gonna understand this as sort of like the closest way that medievals would understand the will when we talk about it in contemporary philosophy. We don't really have voluntas and the intellect anymore. It gets kind of weird because we use like the word will, want, and desire in like very similar, like as synonyms basically. In contemporary compatibilism, we do sort of distinguish between the three, and also volition. We throw the word volition in there. They do get distinguished. Will referring specifically to an affective desire, and then volition, basically referring to like a want that you don't really have control over necessarily, and then desire referring to something that you do have control over, or something like that. I don't. We sort of have something like the intellect also, like we have reason or something like that. But by and large, I don't think we have something that really resembles a voluntas or the intellect. I think the best way to think about will moving forward is arbitrium, and then vice versa. Okay. So metaphysics of moral responsibility. So all I'll be doing right now is just understand sort of the structure of the soul and how medievals and reformers thought that you could do something, right? It's through the two faculties of the soul being structured in the right way, working together in the right way, and then they cause an effective desire, and you do that thing. Right? But we still haven't figured out under what conditions we have moral responsibility. All right, so that's going to be the main goal of this section, is just figure out what dual faculty psychology says about moral responsibility. And then we're also going to compare this to some challenges for contemporary compatibilism and see how contemporary compatibilism and dual faculty psychology can sort of handle the depravity and responsibility tension. I'm going to argue that I think sort of the Frankfurtian compatibilism that we've been working with is problematic for theological contexts, and that the dual faculty psychology does offer a better solution. And this is going to be against a philosopher named Lynn Rudder-Baker. And she's a Christian philosopher. She wrote a paper basically saying that Christians ought to be Frankfurtian style compatibilists. But anyways, we're going to see how all this stuff works out. Okay. So some preliminary stuff. We need to figure out what exactly we're having more responsibility for. We're most interested in having more responsibility for our sin, right? So I'm gonna make another commitment, is that sin, like to do something good, you need both the right sort of inward posture to doing an action, and you also need to do the right external action. So here's Luther in his Small Catechism at the beginning of his explanation of the Ten Commandments. Before, he says we should fear and love God so that we do some sort of external action. So if you don't fear and love God, but you still do that external action, you're not really doing the whole Ten Commandments, is what he's saying here. So again, you can do something really good on the outside, but if you don't have the right inward posture, it can still be sinful. So this is going to be a commitment I'm making. I hope it's not terribly controversial, but maybe it is. Anyways, okay. Right. So I also want to, this is a little bit tangential, but I also want to situate the role of the intellect very carefully here. So at some point we're going to run into problems with sort of natural knowledge and things like that. And I want to understand natural knowledge in a very particular way, assuming dual faculty psychology here. So, right, it's true that humans have some gauge on what's right and wrong. We have some very primitive way of understanding what actions are good, what actions are sinful. And I'm going to understand it in this way that Luther does. And it's not just because he's Luther, but I do think this seems right to me. So in this passage from Paul, right, when Gentiles who do not have the law do what the law requires, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. I want to distinguish, following Luther, that the work of the law is different from the law. So namely, the law contains both the sort of external actions in the inward posture, the sort of divine grace or whatever, to fulfill the whole law. That's not what's written on our heart. It's just the external actions. And in particular, to get specific here, I think these inward actions are situated in the intellect. The external actions are situated in the intellect. The intellect can make moral judgments on outward actions, right? So we can basically say oh, this seems good, this seems bad, or whatever, according to natural knowledge. So this is how I'm understanding Paul. And yeah, so this is just an additional theological commitment. Okay. I think that's everything I wanted to say here. Okay, so now moving more into moral responsibility. So free arbitrium, is it a necessary condition for moral responsibility? I argue no. Right, so if human actions have free arbitrium, then humans can freely choose to do any actions. If humans can freely choose to do any action, then it is possible humans can do non-sinful actions, contra depravity. Oh, I should mention, I made this clear later on, but we're talking like strictly before regeneration, so like non-believers, whatever. You can I think you can play out the whole dual faculty psychology through regeneration and get an interesting story of what it means to do something good and things like that. But right now we're just going to be talking about like just prior to regeneration. All right. Okay. Yeah. Is free arbitrium a necessary condition for moral responsibility? So I mean you got to see where this is going, right? Free arbitrium, if we're understanding this as free will, no, it doesn't seem like we need free arbitrium, and it doesn't seem like given our theological. Oh, right. So I'm gonna try to argue for this position from two different perspectives, right? Here's the theological perspective. Given our theological commitments, we can't have free arbitrium, like period. We just can't. So if we're to have responsibility at all, like you just can't have free arbitrium, right? But I'm also going to argue this from a metaphysical perspective as well. Given we're talking about prior to regeneration, there's some things we can say about the structure of the soul and the way that the intellect and voluntas sort of communicate, and that maybe the way they communicate doesn't allow for free arbitrium to happen. Right? So here's the idea, right? So for free arbitrium, we need the intellect to be working, we need the voluntas to be working, they need to be doing their actions, and we also need proper communication. And I'm going to define proper communication here as the voluntas can accurately consider the moral judgments of the possible action presented by the intellect. So here's the idea, right? So prior to regeneration, so we have natural knowledge, we can say certain things about the goodness and badness of external actions, right? So the intellect can present to the voluntas a set of possible actions, and attached with each of them is going to be like a thumbs up or thumbs down or something like that on whether the external action is good. The voluntas is going to sort of take that in. It's going to take in the possible actions, and it's also going to consider the moral judgment, the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and then it's going to pick one of these. Right? And in particular, for proper communication, we want the right moral judgments. So it's going to turn out basically that prior to regeneration, we can't make the right moral judgments. We can make some moral judgments, but we can't make the right moral judgments because we don't have the full knowledge of the law as revealed in Scripture. Okay. Right. So this passage from Romans 7, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Right, so here's how I'm understanding this in dual faculty psychology terms. Right, so again, sort of divorcing the natural meaning of desire in this case. Desire does not refer to the voluntas, the working of the voluntas. We're going to distinguish sort of desire as is commonly used as an internal action that's caused by both the voluntas and the intellect, right? So the sort of the desire, the mental act, it needs both the voluntas to work and the intellect to work. And so, what do we say here? Oh no, humans lack the effectuating action of the voluntas to do good. Oh right. So the voluntas doesn't want to do good, so we can't effectuate good, even if like on some level we desire to do it, right? Yes. Okay. A little bit crazy, but hopefully that makes enough sense. Humans lack proper communication, so cannot have free arbitrium. All right. Cool. Oh yeah. Okay. I will mention here, like this is not humans don't have free arbitrium. This is my thesis. I'm defending it. This is not the same claim Luther makes in Bondage of the Will, right? Luther makes famously that we don't have free arbitrium. Will being arbitrium. This is not the same. So the intention again is not for this to just be a Lutheran ramble, but to be applicable to all Christendom, to theology broadly speaking. Right. Okay. Good. So is the action of the voluntas a necessary condition for moral responsibility? If an agent has moral responsibility for an action, then the agent has control over an action. agent has control over an action if and only if the voluntas desires to do that action, right? So I think premise one is fairly self-explanatory. It's just intuitive. I don't like have a good argument for this. It's just intuitive, right? If an action is randomly done, like you just like there's no way you desire to do it, right? You have to have some sort of control over it. For the dual faculty psychology, what it means to have control over it is for you to effectuate it. Voluntas in its faculties is able to sort of effectuate desires. If we go back to how Albertus sort of had this 4-step recipe, the last step is with the voluntas, picking out, desiring, and effectuating an action. So to have control over an action is just for the voluntas to choose to have an effective desire for that action, to want to do it and to carry it out, right? So then that leads me to the way we're going to determine, or the way we're going to relate moral responsibility to the structure of the soul, and that's going to be with the action of the voluntas as a necessary condition for moral responsibility. Right. So there's the final statement there, right? An agent has moral responsibility for an action only if the voluntas, that should say, effectively desires to do that action. So now we're going to try to resolve the tension. All right, first we're going to see if contemporary compatibilism, actually we're just going to just develop this generally first, and then we'll see if contemporary compatibilism offers a really good explanation or not. Right. So general strategy, like I mentioned, we're going to deny premise one. So we're as compatibilists, we're left liable for an explanation for how we can judge when we have more responsibility for an action. Contemporary compatibilists are going to do this through higher order volitions, through higher order desires, and dual faculty psychology is going to do this through the effective desire of the voluntas, right? So higher order volitions and effective order of the voluntas. Right. So let's think about contemporary compatibilism a little more. So there's a really famous sort of objection for contemporary compatibilists, and it's this sort of like self-creation thing. So if we have this sort of like tier of desires, like, all right, so I have a second order desire, I want to do something. I could also have a third order desire, I want to do something. I could have a fourth order desire, I want to do something, and so on and so forth. Do all of my higher order desires have to be in line with my first order desire, right? That's a lot. That's a lot for a human to do. More importantly, how much control do I have over my second order desires? Like if all my actions are totally determined, and it seems like my second order desires are also totally determined, can I really have that much control over my second order desires? And here's some specific instances. So brainwashing, right? So if you get brainwashed, like you think something is good, it seems like your second order desires aren't necessarily in line with your first order desires. Moreover, it seems like you don't seem to be able to know better. You don't seem to be able to do what you really want. You're coerced, and the structure of your thoughts has changed such that you don't really have control over these things anymore. So it might be that the brainwashing is so good that your second order volitions are in line with your first order volitions. So it seems like you have more responsibility, right? At least you satisfy the necessary conditions for it. Stockholm syndrome, yeah. There's the famous example of thought experiment is with this evil dictator named Joe. He's just absolutely tyrannical, and he has a son named Jojo. And Jojo grows up just learning that all these heinous things that his dad are doing are good. Joe is round up all these like peoples and whatever, and throw them in the furnaces or whatever, and like this is good, I'm
with you.
Yeah, exactly. and then Joe passes away, right? He's old, he dies, and then Jojo takes his spot, and he rules just as viciously as his dad, right? Is Jojo morally responsible for all of his actions? He was never exposed to good ruling. He was never exposed to like what it means to be a good ruler or what good things look like. He was taught his whole life that all these terrible things are bad. So Jojo's second order volitions are clearly in line with his first order volitions, right? He's not under coercion or anything like that. His first order volitions are effective, so it seems like he has more responsibility. But there's something about this that we want to say. Maybe he doesn't, right? And we certainly don't want to like take someone who's been brainwashed later in life and does a bunch of heinous acts. We probably don't want to hold them morally responsible. So the way we're going to classify this is under the guise of sanity. So we're gonna posit a sanity condition, and here's how we're understanding sanity. This is from Susan Wolf's paper. I think it's called Sanity and the Metaphysics of Moral Responsibility. But here's what she says: sanity is being able to understand and appreciate right from wrong, to change our character and actions accordingly. And then I believe, maybe I should go back and check this, but I believe she makes this necessary and sufficient for moral responsibility. That you're morally responsible for your actions if and only if you have your higher order desire, your second order volition is in line with your first order volition, and you're sane, right? So if you're able to judge right from wrong, you're able to change your actions accordingly, then you're liable to be responsible for your actions. So in this way, Jojo is not responsible for his actions. He's not sane. He can't look at what he's doing and say this is wrong and then change his actions accordingly. He can't appreciate right from wrong, and he can't change characters accordingly. So this is going to be the general approach for Frankfurtian style compatibilists for handling these kinds of objections. Let's do a sanity condition. All right, so I'm going to say depravity rules out the possibility that we're sane under Susan Wolf's definition. Right? So if humans are sane, by definition, an agent, we can change our character and do what is right, potentially at least. If an agent can change his character and do what is right, then it's possible that we can do non-sinful actions on our own, right, prior to regeneration. So we contradict depravity at this point. So it seems like we can't be sane, right? We can't be sane under Susan Wolf's understanding of things. So if we can't be sane, then we're still not morally responsible for all of our actions, right? We have under Frankfurtian style compatibilism. We need both sanity and our second order volitions to be in line. So yeah. Now, I want to take a second also to note that I don't think dual faculty psychology has the same self-creation problem. This goes back to like, I don't think the sort of desires of the voluntas are the same thing as second order desires. There seem to be something different. There seem to be situated sort of like a different part. They're a different style of desire. They're just metaphysically very different. So we don't have the same sort of self-creation problem, I don't think. Okay, so all right, whole picture. Dual faculty psychology is compatibilist. Agent has moral responsibility for an action only if the voluntas effectively desires the action. We don't have the self-creation objection, and we can be committed to depravity, responsibility, and abound arbitrium, or like not free, right? Don't understand this in Lutheran's way. I think Frankfurtian style compatibilism offers a pretty good start. But if we add the sanity condition in, I don't think Christians can hold the sanity condition. Can hold the sanity condition with responsibility. We have to be insane if we're to be responsible, we have to be insane if we are to hold depravity. And if we're insane, then we just can't have responsibility under Frankfurtian style compatibilism with the sanity condition. If we don't have the sanity condition, then we got to figure something else out to answer this self-creation objection. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.